The night was only shadows when he heard a voice that would change his life forever. In a dry rancho on the edge of a forgotten valley, in a year of drought and thin hopes, Miguel woke before the sun and carried the weight of a whole familia on his shoulders. His hands were cracked from plowing land that no longer gave. His shirt smelled of dust and aguardiente from the last night at the cantina, and his wife Maria waited at the doorway with a look that held every small grief. "Miguel, how will we eat?" she asked, with a soft voice that trembled like the lantern by the stove. "I do not know, Maria," he answered, rubbing his palm against sleeves that had long lost their color. His son Luis fingered the hem of his shirt, and the house dog Coco whimpered for scraps. Neighbors like Rosa and old Juan at the plaza had begun to whisper, "There must be some reason the rancho is cursed," and the ache of shame sat heavy. He swore under his breath, "I will not let you go hungry," and the word came out as both promise and prayer. The kitchen tasted of soot and cold beans. The air carried the bitter tang of aguardiente on his breath from sleepless nights, and even the crumbling fence felt like a sentence. He felt small, a man of the earth with empty hands. And that evening a sound from the cementerio split the sky. At the edge of the cemetery, a figure was trapped behind an enrejado, a silhouette against moonlight that looked like a tale come to life. Miguel heard a voice calling socorro, a voice that sounded like water over stones and also like a laugh. "Help me, compadre," the stranger said, touching the metal with fingers that were almost too warm. Miguel hesitated, tasting fear like metal on his tongue. "Who are you?" he asked. "We are just men in need," the stranger replied. "My name is not important, only this, compadre. I was bound, and now you can free me." Miguel pulled at the rusty lock, and the gate groaned like an old animal. "Why should I risk myself for a stranger?" Miguel asked, palms raw from the cold. "Because favor can be repaid, and because families must help when they can," the stranger answered softly. The stranger smelled faintly of river mud and something sweet under it, like sugar or a memory. And when his hand slipped into Miguel's, the touch was oddly firm, like pressing into earth that had been packed for years. "If you free me," the stranger said low, "call me compadre. And when you whisper, 'Ayuda, compadre,' I will hear and the land will prosper." Miguel felt the taste of hope like rain. "You promise?" he said. "I promise as compadre," the man replied. The gate opened and the stranger stepped out with a smile that showed too many teeth. "I will call you compadre," Miguel said, and the words felt both blessing and bargain. The stranger vanished into mist, and the smell of aguardiente returned, lingering like a warning. The days that followed looked almost like miracles. The next morning in the campo, a small spring had bubbled where only cracked earth had been. And in the first colheita after the whisper, the corn stood taller than any neighbor remembered. Miguel called Don Mateo at the cantina to tell him, and Don Mateo slapped his knee laughing. "No, Miguel, you jest." Maria prepared a feast with beans and roasted goat, and the house filled with the sound of spoons and the sweet heat of stew. "We ate like kings," Luis said with a mouthful of bread. "This is a milagro," Rosa declared, bringing a basket of fresh eggs from her own hen. People in the plaza stared with wide eyes, and Padre Tomas blessed the first sack of maize with a nod that was more curiosity than doctrine. At the cantina, Don Mateo poured aguardiente and raised the glass. "To Miguel, may the rancho prosper," he said. "To Miguel," everyone echoed. Miguel answered each thanks with quiet hands and a strange nod of guilt. One evening at the table, he murmured, "Compadre, if you are there, help a little more." And the wind that night smelled of sugar and hot metal, as if coins had been rubbed by unseen hands. If you felt that nod of hope when they first ate, you are not alone. Share a moment you remember that felt like a miracle. Start by writing, "There was a time when," and tell us in the comments. Your stories keep these traditions alive and inspire new tales for our channel. Now, while the family rejoiced, envy like a shadow began to gather in corners of the town. Not everyone blessed their fortune. Diego the curandero came by with a proposition wrapped in worry, hands stained with herbs. "Be careful," he told Miguel, smelling of sage and earth. "Some favors carry taxes." "What kind of tax?" Miguel asked, fingers still smelling of corn. Diego lowered his voice. "A compadre is a pact. Use it with measure." Don Mateo, Ariela the baker, and old Juan all agreed in their own ways. "Do not flaunt it. Keep some for the poor. Do not let the cantina become your bank." The cantinero Don Mateo offered to store a cofre with what they saved, and Rosa said she would watch Luis when Maria went to the market. Miguel replied, "We will live humbly." And the sound of that sentence was like a net cast into calmer waters. There were smells of fresh bread, of wet earth, the clack of coins in a box, and the soft fabric of Maria's apron. The compadre's warning hung in the air like incense. "If you take more than you need," Diego added, "the price will be something that cannot be bought back." Miguel felt the skin on his neck prickle and said, "I will not be greedy," though sleep that night tasted of metal and guilt. Jealousy crept fast. Pedro the mason and siblings Tomas and Elena whispered in the plaza, plotting to take what had been hidden in the cofre. "Why should he prosper when we starved?" Pedro hissed. "He took a stranger from the night and now plays rich," Elena spat. They moved in the dark, ropes and keys passed in shaking hands under a lamplight. One night they broke into the rancho while Miguel and Maria slept to steal the cofre. "Quiet," Pedro said, prying the latch. "The wood smells sharp and oily." "We have to do this now," Tomas replied, fingertips cold on the metal. Inside the house, Coco barked, and Luis woke, whispering, "Mommy, who is there?" Maria reached for a knife and called out, "What do you want?" Elena answered harsh, "We want what you hoard." Miguel leaped up. "You will not take from my family," he shouted. "Back away," Pedro warned. The room was full of the smell of smoke and fear, the taste of copper in Miguel's mouth. As they fought, a wind rose that had no source, and the aguardiente bottle on the table trembled as if with laughter. "Stop," a voice said, not from throat, but from bone, and a shadow moved at the doorway like a tide of dark. "You called me, compadre," the voice said. The intruders froze with eyes wide. "I did not call you that for thieves," Miguel whispered. The shadow reached, and the night filled with a sound like bells beneath the earth. Pedro cried out, not human now, and then the room was silent except for the slow, wet sound of something returning to the ground. When the light returned, Pedro was on the floor, with eyes that saw something beyond and could no longer speak. The town murmured that night about a justice that was not the law. In the end, Miguel chose what must be chosen. He went to the plaza and gave the cofre to Don Mateo to open in front of the whole village. "We share," he declared, hands shaking but steady. The pieces inside shone like secrets, small coins, and a folded note that simply said, "Remember the pact." Maria kissed his weathered cheek, and Luis stood proud, but Miguel felt older than his years. He walked to the cementerio where he had first met the stranger and left a cup of aguardiente at the foot of the carved stone, the smell rising like an offering and a warning. "Compadre," he whispered into that cold air, "we kept our word and we shared the blessing. Now let it be enough." The wind answered by stirring dry grass. Friends like Rosa and Diego came to sit with him, and Padre Tomas lit a candle, though he would not name the thing that protected them. Time healed some wounds. Miguel grew a little softer around the edges. Maria laughed more often, and Luis learned the trades of field and trust. In his final days, he told stories to grandchildren and to neighbors like Ana and Santiago who would stop by the porch. He would say, "Ay, compadrito, there are favors the land keeps and favors the world takes back." And they would lean in, smelling tobacco and stew. He died an old man with his hand in Maria's, a peaceful breath leaving him on a morning that smelled of wet soil and bread. Before that, he had asked Diego to bless his passing with herbs, and had asked Don Mateo to pour a glass of aguardiente for the road. "Tell them I was not selfish," he said, voice small, and Maria pressed her forehead to his and said, "You were a good man." The epilogue is simple and strange. The rancho prospered enough to buy a cart and mend the fence, and the plaza remembered both miracles and warnings. People still said that on certain nights 2 figures sat on the alpendre, passing a bottle and speaking in low voices like compadres, and that a faint light moved by the cementerio as if someone kept watch. The moral was never tidy, for some souls saw blessing and some saw price. If this tale stirred a mix of hope and chill in you, share your own memory where help came with a cost, and join our community. Subscribe if you want more stories of ordinary people who touch the impossible, and come back next week for another legend from the rancho and beyond.